Greetings and welcome to Talk a Little, Learn a Lot, the American Society of Naval Engineers podcast. I am your host, Stephen Phillips. In this podcast, we talk a little and learn a lot about naval engineering while inspiring the next generation of STEM professionals. Today, I'm joined by Dan Taylor, editor of the Naval Engineers Journal, to discuss the current and future issues. Dan, welcome back. You were in episode 1, in fact, of Talk a Little, Learn a Lot. So thank you for joining me again on the podcast.
Absolutely. And thank you, Stephen, for having me on the show again.
Right on. Dan, would you introduce yourself to the Talk a Little, Learn a Lot audience in case some folks have not heard you on episode 1?
Sure. So I am the managing editor of the Naval Engineers Journal, a position I have served in for about a year and a half now. So I have overseen about 6 issues now, going back to fall 2024. So my job is to curate, strong naval engineering content, which will include both peer-reviewed technical papers and non-peer-reviewed articles. And I work with our authors to make sure it's clear, it's relevant, it's useful to the naval engineering community. My background as a journalist covering the U.S. Navy goes back almost 20 years now. I started in '07. So I've been long been familiar with ASNE's work and was excited when I was asked to join the organization.
So let's start by discussing this current issue. I actually have a regular column now in the journal where I talk about the podcast. In this particular issue, I mentioned that I interviewed John DeDola to discuss his article entitled The Hidden Life Cycle Costs of Naval Hull Materials. And then from this issue, the winter issue, I interviewed Lisa Marion to discuss her article, Aligning Early Stage Ship Design and Model Based Systems Engineering Methodologies. I did that one in episode 41. I plan to continue to interview more Naval Engineers Journal authors. I think it gives an opportunity to delve deeper into the piece, to help proliferate the message. It's a great way to hear from the author and to get their voice out there. Um, so the first piece in this edition is entitled Naval Engineers Can Enable the U.S. Navy to Achieve New Levels of Unmanned Surface Vessel Autonomy by Captain George Galdarisi, U.S. Navy retired, and Lieutenant Commander Jack Rowley, U.S. Navy retired. What's the main theme of this article?
I really enjoyed this piece. So this article makes a really important point that gets lost in the hype, and that is that unmanned is not the same thing as autonomous. So a lot of people assume if there's no crew on the vessel, the Navy automatically saves manpower, but the authors explain the opposite can happen. If these systems still require big teams of people ashore or on board other ships to watch them and control them and maintain them and troubleshoot them, then you haven't really reduced the workload, you've just moved it. So the prize, as they frame it, is real autonomy, which is getting beyond the one operator, one vehicle model and moving toward a future where fewer people can safely supervise more systems, especially at sea where every extra person adds space and food and weight and cost. Um, so then they bring it to life in this paper with a current example or article, I should say. So a joint staff demonstration where unmanned surface vessels used onboard AI to detect, classify, and track contacts, and then they coordinate as a swarm with human on the loop approach for safety. So the message is this is doable, but it's a hard engineering problem. And they're basically calling on naval engineers to lead the push to make autonomy scalable and real, not just a series of one-off demos.
The next article is also near and dear to the future. It was entitled Explainable AI and Trusted AI. So, what is this all about?
This one is very approachable, I think, for all of us because it's not AI theory. It's about human decision making under pressure. So the authors start with a simple reality. As the Navy scales up distributed operations with more unmanned systems, more data, more speed, the operators are going to lean harder on AI decision aids. But as we all know, a lot of AI can feel like a black box, and that raises a sort of basic operational question, which is, if the system recommends something, how do I know to trust it? I think we're all familiar with AI hallucinations. So trust is a big factor in AI if it's just going to be a useful tool. So they highlight something called automation bias, which is basically our tendency to overtrust tools even when we shouldn't. And they spell out how that can fail in two ways. So number one, you can follow a flawed recommendation, which is an error of commission, or you can miss a problem because you stop monitoring, which is an error of omission. So the point of explainable AI isn't to make people trust AI more, it's to help people calibrate trust correctly. So in other words, when is the system strong? When is it weak? And why is it recommending what it's recommending? And then they sort of widen that lens. Explanation alone isn't enough. They introduce the idea of trusted AI and even give a sort of more memorable checklist style acronym of FASTER to think about what trustworthy means beyond just a pretty explanation screen.
Dan, another eye-catching article is Future Shipboard Coordination of Kinetic and Directed Energy Weapons Engagements by Dr. Bonnie Johnson and Dr. John Green. What do they tell us about lasers coming into the kinetic fight?
Yeah, this is another interesting piece. This article is basically about what happens when you add a whole new category of weapon into ship defense. Because we have directed energy, and then there's kinetic weapons, which is the more standard type of weapons. And you're trying to make it work as part of a team, not as it's like some science project bolted onto the ship. So the authors point out that the Navy is pushing directed energy forward, and then we're talking about lasers and microwaves because there's huge upside to it. But the hard part is that it expands the ship's engagement quote decision space. In plain English, you could just give the ship more options, more variables, and therefore more ways to make the wrong call under pressure unless you coordinate it well. They also explain a key mindset shift that matches what you were already saying, but we can say it even more precisely, which is that traditional kinetic layered defense is often range based, but directed energy is much more time based because effectiveness depends on things like dwell time on target, atmospheric effects, and the ship's available power and cooling. So they describe NPS analytical work that uses systems analysis, modeling and simulation, kill chain thinking, and even machine learning to study how to coordinate kinetic and non-kinetic options. That includes threat evaluation, weapon assignment functions. So that way the ship can make better choices about when to shoot what and how to avoid problems like, deconfliction and resource limits. So the takeaway is lasers aren't just another gun. They change the logic of defense, and the Navy has to build the engineering and decision frameworks to use them intelligently alongside, missiles and guns and the typical kinetic weapons out there.
Dan, what can we expect in the next edition of Naval Engineers Journal?
Yeah, so we're already at work on the spring 2026 issue, which has a couple pieces I'm excited about because they hit on some very key problems the Navy is wrestling with right now. So first, we have a case style piece on the Columbia class submarine program, and it's framed around the real world tension between cost and schedule and performance and the industrial capacity, which is our very hot topics right now. And this is a very critical program and a very large program. It's basically designed to put you in the decision seat and ask, what do you do when you don't have much margin left, but the mission, can't slip? Second, we're publishing a technical paper on shipboard power and specifically how to model modern ship electrical systems faster without losing the insight you need. As ships pack on more sensors and defensive systems and electric propulsion, the power grid is now the backbone of the ship. The paper is about faster ways to simulate that backbone so designers and engineers can test what if scenarios without waiting forever for heavy computations.
And what are you looking for future editions of the journal?
I'm looking for work that makes people think, the kind of content where you finish reading and go, okay, that changes how I see the problem. AI is, of course, a growing subject of interest, but we're not locked into any one trend. If it's a real engineering challenge facing the Navy, and those are many and varied, it could be about power, maintenance, survivability, autonomy, ship design. These are all cutting edge topics that we want to hear about and hear solutions to, or just really an engaging piece discussing the problem like that autonomy piece we just talked about.
Dan, I'm interested. What advice do you have for those that are writing articles for the journal?
Right, so for technical paper, we have a peer review process that's pretty well established. But if you're just looking to write a non-peer reviewed piece, which we do run a lot of, my the best advice I would have is just reach out before you write the whole thing, obviously, to make sure it's a good fit. So send me a short pitch. Love to receive those pitches. We have space, and we're not really constrained by that. So if you've got an interesting piece to write, we'd probably be happy to run it. Just reach out to me, give me your pitch, and we'll talk it through.
And so if someone decides to submit for a peer-reviewed paper, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so for a peer-reviewed paper, it goes through essentially a formal review process. It's submitted through our channels, and then we have an editor as well as reviewers who go through it. They'll make suggestions for changes. They'll go back for revisions, maybe. If they do have revisions, you'll make those changes, and then of course the editor-in-chief makes a final decision on whether that is going to be approved for publishing. And once it is, then I sort of get it set for publishing the issue.
Dan, is there anything else that you would like to share with the Talk a Little, Learn a Lot audience?
Yeah, so the world is becoming increasingly digital, and that applies to us as well. And we're launching a blog soon with all new naval engineering content. So stay tuned to that. I think it'll be a great way to publish more frequently and spotlight emerging ideas faster, and just really connect with the younger engineers out there and everyone out there, because that's all we can, that's how we consume content these days. And I think there's a lot of things we have to say that can go beyond just the quarterly issues that we do.
I'm looking forward to that. Dan, let's close by sharing with the Talk a Little, Learn a Lot audience that there are three tributes in the winter 2026 edition: Captain Al Skolnick, Captain Bill Crow, and Captain Joseph Urso. Each of them has recently passed away. Captain Skolnick served as the ASNE president, Captain Crow as the National Council vice president, and Captain Urso served as the ASNE national president. So, with solemnity, let's wish them fair winds and following seas. And so, thank you, Dan Taylor, Naval Engineers Journal managing editor, for taking this time to discuss the journal. I hope we can welcome you back in the future to Talk a Little, Learn a Lot, the podcast of the American Society of Naval Engineers.
Thank you, Stephen.